February 27th, 1941. 3:47 a.m., Chief Controller Arthur Pemberton stood in the York Railway control room, watching his network disappear. The snow had been falling for 51 hours straight. 14 feet of it now blocked the main line north of Darlington. 53 trains were scattered across northeast England, buried or stalled. 25 had derailed trying to push through drifts. Every single route to Newcastle was impassable, and somewhere in that white chaos 4,000 passengers sat in unheated carriages waiting. Standard procedure said wait for the weather, let the storm pass, clear the lines methodically, route by route, day by day. Pemberton had other plans. In the next 120 hours, 5 improvised snow-clearing trains would attempt what the railway manual said was impossible: restore a paralysed network while German bombers circled overhead and coal supplies dwindled toward nothing. Trains that normally took 4 hours to reach Newcastle from London would take 26. Workers would dig by hand through drifts taller than houses, and Britain's war effort, dependent on those northern rail lines for munitions, troops and coal, would hang on whether a few hundred railway men could move faster than the weather. This is the story of 56 hours of snow and the 5 days that followed. The context nobody saw coming. Britain's railway system in February 1941 was already operating at the edge of collapse. 2 years of war had stripped the network of 100,000 workers called to military service. The locomotives that remained were running double shifts, maintenance deferred, replacement parts scarce. Every major line carried not just civilian traffic, but military movements, munitions shipments, and the coal that powered everything else. Northeast England mattered more than most. The railways from York through Durham to Newcastle formed Britain's industrial spine. Sheffield Steel moved north on those tracks. Tyneside shipyards depended on them. The naval base at Scapa Flow in Scotland received supplies through Newcastle. Cut that link and you severed Britain's ability to build ships, manufacture weapons, and maintain the home fleet. The weather forecast on February 25th had predicted light snow, flurries, nothing unusual for late winter in Yorkshire. The forecast was catastrophically wrong. Hour 0. The storm arrives. The snow started falling at 7:15 p.m. on February 26th. Within 3 hours, the flurries had become a blizzard. Not the dramatic, wind-driven kind. Worse. A steady, relentless, vertical dump of snow falling at nearly 2 inches per hour. No breaks, no pauses, just snow, accumulating faster than gravity could compress it. By midnight, the Leeds-York line reported 6 inches. Manageable. By 2 a.m., 18 inches. Concerning. By 6 a.m. on the 27th, 3 feet. The first train started getting stuck. The 22:45 York to Newcastle Express, 8 carriages, 247 passengers, ground to a halt at Crofts Bar at 6:23 a.m. The locomotive's wheels spun uselessly. Snow had packed into the driving mechanism. The train couldn't move forward, couldn't reverse, just sat there, blocking the main line, as snow piled higher around it. 7 minutes later, the 23:30 from King's Cross hit the same drift from behind. 2 trains, now stationary, on Britain's most critical northern route. Arthur Pemberton, receiving the reports by telephone in York, made his first decision. Send the snowplows. The ploughs that couldn't, the London and North Eastern Railway owned 11 steam-powered snowplows designed specifically for this scenario. Massive wedge-fronted machines that could theoretically clear drifts up to 6 feet deep. Theoretically. The first plough left York at 7:05 a.m., heading north toward the stranded trains. It made it 12 miles. At Northallerton, the plough hit a drift and stopped dead. The snow was too deep, too fresh, too powdery. The wedge rode up over it instead of cutting through. The plough derailed slightly. Not enough to overturn, but enough to jam itself sideways across both tracks. Now 3 problems blocked the line: 2 trapped passenger trains and a stuck snowplow. The second plough, dispatched from Darlington heading south, fared worse. It cleared 7 miles before hitting a 15-foot drift near Croft. The impact bent the plough's frame. The locomotive behind it lost traction on packed ice under the snow. Both went into the ditch at 9:40 a.m. 23 people aboard, including the driver, Cecil Hardwick, 52, who'd spent 34 years clearing northern lines. He'd never seen anything like this. By 10 a.m., 5 of the 11 ploughs were disabled or trapped. The snow kept falling, and the passenger trains were running out of coal for their heating systems. The decision Pemberton faced a choice that railway controllers aren't supposed to face. Wait, and let the storm finish. Risk hypothermia for the trapped passengers, but preserve the equipment and the network for eventual clearing. Standard, safe, slow, or commit everything now. Every available locomotive, every worker who could hold a shovel. Clear the lines by force, even as the snow continued falling, even with German reconnaissance aircraft photographing the chaos. At 11:17 a.m. on February 27th, Pemberton picked up the telephone to the Ministry of War Transport. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. He requested military assistance, priority authority over all rolling stock in the northeast, and permission to commandeer civilian labour. The ministry approved it in 3 minutes. At 11:21 a.m, Pemberton issued orders to assemble 5 special trains. The snow trains. They weren't designed for this. No trains were. Each special consisted of whatever Pemberton could scrape together. The most powerful available locomotive, usually a Class A3 Pacific or Class 5 2262, 2 or 3 goods wagons loaded with coal and supplies, flat cars carrying shovels, picks, timber and rope, and a passenger coach converted into a mobile command post with telephone equipment. The crews weren't specialists, they were whoever showed up. Railway workers, volunteer civilians, army engineers pulled from nearby training depots. On Train 3, 17 men from the Durham Light Infantry reported for duty still carrying their rifles. They'd been heading to the coast for embarkation when the snow trapped their transport. They would dig instead. Train 1 departed York at 1:40 p.m. on the 27th, heading for the stranded King's Cross Express. Train 2 left Darlington for the York-Newcastle train at Croft. Trains 3, 4 and 5 spread across the blocked routes, the coastal line through Seaham, the inland route via Bishop Auckland, the southern approach through Northallerton. The plan was simple: reach the trapped trains, dig them out, clear the line forward, move to the next obstruction, repeat until Newcastle. 5 days. That was the estimate. They had less time than that. Day 1. The dig begins train. One made it 8 miles before hitting snow too deep to push through. The locomotive stopped. The crew got out, and they started digging, with shovels. The drift blocking the line was 11 feet high, 40 feet wide, packed so solid that shovels bounced off the surface. 56 men attacked it in rotating shifts, 10 minutes digging, 5 minutes warming by the locomotive's firebox, then back into the snow. They worked without speaking. There wasn't breath to spare. It took them 6 hours to cut a path 12 feet long. Behind them, the snow kept falling. Train 2, approaching from the south, tried a different technique. The crew ran the locomotive at the drift repeatedly, backing up and ramming forward, using momentum to compact and shift the snow. It worked, sort of. The locomotive pushed through 3 drifts this way, gaining 2 miles. Then the 4th drift was harder. The impact damaged the locomotive's front coupling. The ram stopped working. The crew joined the shoveling. By nightfall on the 27th, the 5 trains had collectively moved 17 miles through snow that should have stopped them completely. They'd reached none of the trapped passenger trains. But they'd learned something important. Hand digging was faster than mechanical ploughing in snow this deep. It just required vastly more humans. The call for shovelers. On the morning of February 28th, with the snow finally stopping after 56 hours, Pemberton made a radio appeal. He needed 2,000 men with shovels, immediately, to clear Britain's railways. He got 2,400. They came from everywhere. Miners from Durham who knew how to move earth, farm workers from Yorkshire, factory hands from Leeds, soldiers on leave, teenagers lying about their age, men too old for military service who wanted to contribute, women from the Women's Voluntary Service who showed up with thermoses and blankets, then grabbed shovels when they saw what needed doing. The railway organised them into work gangs of 50, assigned each gang to a specific section, and sent them out on hastily assembled transport trains. No protective gear, no safety briefings, just shovels, hot tea, and instructions to clear the line. They worked in conditions that would shut down modern operations instantly. Temperature, 18 degrees Fahrenheit, wind chill making it feel like 0, snow still shifting and drifting even though it had stopped falling. ice forming underneath, visibility dropping whenever the wind picked up, and overhead occasionally the distant drone of German aircraft. The Luftwaffe hadn't missed Britain's railway crisis. The threat from above, German reconnaissance flights had photographed the paralysed network on February 28th. Intelligence officers in occupied France saw the opportunity immediately. Britain's northern industrial lifeline, completely exposed, unable to move, perfect for bombing. Strike now and the damage would compound for months. 3 Heinkel. He-111 bombers took off from French bases on the evening of March 1st, heading for the railway yards at York and Darlington. They found targets everywhere. Stranded trains, stationary locomotives, work gangs clustered around drifts. The snow had turned the railways into a static display, lit by work lights, impossible to miss. The first bomber dropped 8 250-kilogram bombs on the York goods yard at 9:14 p.m. 6 missed. 1 hit a warehouse, starting a fire that burned for 3 hours. 1 hit the frozen Ouse River and failed to detonate. 0 casualties. The work gangs had heard the aircraft coming and scattered into the snow. The second bomber targeted Darlington 20 minutes later. Its payload fell across the marshalling yard, destroying 3 empty wagons and severing 1 section of cleared track that workers had spent 8 hours opening. The third bomber never reached its target. Engine trouble turned it back over the North Sea. The Luftwaffe would try twice more over the next 3 days, dropping 23 bombs total, achieving minimal damage. The snow, ironically, provided protection. The soft drifts absorbed explosions. The scattered nature of the work made concentrated bombing ineffective. And the railway workers, after the first raid, learned to work in darkness whenever they heard aircraft. The bombs became just another obstacle. Not the primary threat. The primary threat was time. Days 2 and 3. The breakthroughs. By March 2nd, the coordinated effort began producing results. Train 2's crew reached the trapped York-Newcastle Express at Croft at 2:35 p.m, 62 hours after it had stopped. The passengers, stiff, cold, exhausted but alive, were transferred to heated carriages and evacuated south. The stranded locomotive was dug free, inspected, and added to the clearing effort. Train 1 broke through to the King's Cross Express at 6:10 p.m. that same day. Same process: evacuate passengers, salvage the locomotive, keep pushing north. The work gangs, now numbering over 3,000 with additional volunteers, established a rhythm. Teams would dig from both ends of a drift simultaneously, meeting in the middle, then leapfrogging forward to the next obstruction. The fastest crews could clear 100 yards per hour in favourable conditions. Favourable conditions were rare. Most drifts required hand-cutting the top 5 feet, then shovelling out the compressed lower layers, then laying timber beneath the rails to prevent them sinking when trains passed over the disturbed snow. Slow, exhausting, repetitive. But it worked. By the end of March 3rd, Train 1 had cleared a route from York to Northallerton, 32 miles that normally took 40 minutes, now requiring 16 hours of continuous digging. Train 2 had opened the line to Darlington. Trains 3 and 4 had partially cleared the coastal route. Train 5, working the Bishop-Auckland line, had the worst luck. It encountered a drift estimated at 19 feet deep. A full house worth of snow, wind-packed into a railway cutting. The crew spent 2 full days on it, digging in shifts around the clock. They broke through at 4 a.m. on March 4th. 70% of the network was now passable. Slowly, carefully, but passable. The railway still couldn't reach Newcastle. The final push. The last major obstruction sat 8 miles south of Newcastle, near Chesterler Street, a quarter-mile section where snow had drifted between high embankments, creating a continuous 14-foot wall across both tracks. The cutting funneled wind from the North Sea, and even with the snowfall stopped, the drift kept rebuilding as surface snow blew into the gap. Pemberton committed Trains 1 and 2 simultaneously. Both locomotives, both crews, 400 workers with shovels. They attacked the drift from both ends starting at dawn on March 5th. The technique was brutal and effective. The locomotives would ram forward, compacting snow and pushing the drift slightly back. Workers would jump into the gap created, shovel frantically for 5 minutes before the drift collapsed back, then retreat as the locomotive rammed again. Advance, dig, retreat. Advance, dig, retreat. Progress measured in feet per hour. but the drift began shrinking. At 3:20 p.m. on March 5th, 5 days, 2 hours and 27 minutes after Arthur Pemberton had first called for the snow trains, the two locomotives met in the middle of the drift. The path wasn't wide, it wasn't pretty, but it was clear enough. At 4:15 p.m, a test train left York for Newcastle. It arrived at 7:48 p.m, 3 hours, 33 minutes for a journey that should take 90 minutes. But it arrived. The railway to Newcastle was open. The aftermath. The clean-up continued for another week. 23 of the 53 trapped trains were damaged beyond field repair and had to be towed to workshops. 4 locomotives required major overhauls. The railway wrote off 127 wagons as total losses, crushed by snow, derailed or simply buried too deep to economically recover. Human cost, surprisingly light. 47 workers injured, mostly minor. Frostbite, muscle strains, 1 broken arm, 2 deaths, both from heart attacks among older volunteers, 0 deaths from the bombing raids. The stranded passengers, all 4,000 plus, survived, some with frostbite, many with stories they'd tell for decades, all evacuated within the first 3 days once the snow trains broke through. The operation's total scope, 3,400 workers, 5 specialised trains, 7 military engineer detachments, 220 tons of coal consumed, approximately 47 miles of railway, hand-cleared through snow averaging 9 feet deep. Cost to the government, £47,000 in 1941 currency, primarily labour and equipment repair. Value to the war effort, incalculable. The Northern Railway resumed munitions shipments on March 8th, troop movements on March 10th, and full civilian service on March 15th. The delay to Britain's industrial production, 12 days instead of the estimated 6 weeks if they'd waited for a natural thaw. Arthur Pemberton received a commendation from the Ministry of War Transport. He never mentioned it. Considered the operation part of his job. The railway workers received nothing official, went back to their regular duties, kept the trains running through the remaining 4 years of war. What changed? The February 1941 snow siege forced immediate revisions to British railway winter protocols. The Railway Executive Committee, studying Pemberton's operation, issued new guidelines in August 1941. Maintain dedicated snow-clearing equipment at strategic points, pre-position additional locomotives before predicted storms, establish rapid response volunteer networks for emergency labour, and, most significantly, abandon reliance on mechanical ploughs in extreme conditions in favour of massed manual labour, backed by locomotive power. The Pemberton method, as it became unofficially known, was applied successfully during the harsh winter of 1942-43, when similar storms hit Scotland. The response time, 18 hours instead of 5 days. More broadly, the crisis demonstrated something Britain's wartime planners needed to internalise. Mechanical systems fail. Technology has limits. When infrastructure collapses, the solution isn't always engineering. Sometimes it's just people with shovels working in the cold refusing to stop. The Germans learned a different lesson. Their analysis of the bombing raids concluded that attacking snowbound railways was ineffective. The targets were too dispersed, too easy to repair, too resilient when defended by massed labour. The Luftwaffe shifted focus back to cities and factories. That shift arguably saved lives. Not many, but some. Epilogue. The winter of 1941 eventually ended as winters do. The snow melted. The railways returned to normal operations, or what passed for normal during wartime. The drifts became puddles, then memories, then footnotes in railway operational reports. But for 56 hours in February, Britain's industrial north faced a test that had nothing to do with German bombs or U-boats, just weather, just snow. And the response revealed something essential about how systems survive. Not through invulnerability, through adaptability, through the willingness to abandon the manual and improvise, through the unglamorous work of thousands of people doing one cold, miserable, necessary task at a time. Arthur Pemberton retired in 1948, died in 1966, aged 71. His obituary in the York Railway newsletter mentioned the snow trains in one sentence. The workers who dug the lines clear mostly weren't remembered by name. Didn't expect to be. They just knew that trains needed to move and snow needed to be moved and somebody had to do it. So they did.